bonjour, bonjour à vous tous.
So good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for being with us. We have great panelists. It's very hot. It's not easy to endure the hot weather. We have some fans, so you can get a bit of fresh air. The new sectors to produce tomorrow. It's a key topic with lots of challenges. Before getting down to the nitty-gritty of a topic, allow me to make a couple of words. I'd like to say hello to Jean Pisani-Ferry. He's not with us today, and I would like to say hello to him. I'm proud of moderating this panel with relevant, prominent, competent people. But I have an issue when there is no gender balance on the panel. So I can keep a low profile, especially when there are no women on stage. So pandemic, decarbonization, deglobalization, these are three main structural trends, three main underlying trends and transformations, shocks, I would say. And the economic systems are being redesigned, they are being rejigged, and the labor market is being transformed, and we need to adapt very quickly. So there's a specific feature with today's society, fast transformations. We are almost doomed to accept these faster transformations, so we have to change very swiftly. These three main changes, they changed the way we relate to the work, the geography of industrial sites. It's imperative to have a carbon-free economy, and this has an impact on different sectors. What kind of industrial landscape I will introduce the different guests today, the different panelists who are with us. We'll have a look at the different dimensions. First, Jacques Aschenbroich. He worked with Saint-Gobain, Valeo. You were the CEO of Valeo for 6 years, 400,000 employees. You've secured a foothold in 30 countries in the world, lots of Valeo sensors in the world, a big partner of all automotive manufacturers. And this is one of the companies with the highest number of sensors. And your company highlights the transformation of today's world. Next to him, Nicolas Dubourg is our gestion manager, a strategic company in long-term assets. You are well positioned to inform us about industrial projects, relocation projects, how we create not industrial champions, but rather coalitions in order to get champions and focus on innovations. Next to him, Ming Pokai, the CEO of Cathay Capital. So Ming Po arrived in France when he was 20 years of age in Orléans. He's at the head of one of the major capital investment companies created for entrepreneurs. To entrepreneurs. What is important is the cross-border approach. How can we work with industrial alliances, regional alliances, in order to be able to perform and invent the future? Next to him, so we have someone from Tunisia. We are very fortunate, Fatma Marakchi Chanfi. So you've just arrived from Tunisia. Thank you for being with us. You are a professor of economics at the Tunis University. So you are in charge of the International Economic Integration Laboratory, specializing in cooperation. You have lots of skills, lots of competencies. You understand the international markets rationale. 300 million young people will arrive on the labor market in the MENA region. So these people should be able to work in some sectors that will create jobs. So they have to be trained in a relevant fashion. The last guest Kevin. You are Kevin. Sorry. Kevin is the CEO of Camp with the holding company. He took over the camp, the innovation campus of X. It's an interesting innovation place. It's an experience and an experiment as well. So I talked to you a little bit earlier. You told me I like these panels, but I hope that there would be tangible and concrete measures. Of course, we're going to spend a good moment together. We will moot ideas, but we want tangible things, tangible outcomes. In order to focus on energy, what is important is to build the future industrial sectors. So the different panelists will have 5 or 6 minutes to elaborate on an idea. Jacques Aschenbroich told me that he wanted to speak freely, and we can rely on him. He's a major industrialist. He has some unprecedented experience in the field of transformation. We know that France has lost 1/3 of industrial jobs. There was an economic tragedy, and Nicolas Dufour wrote a very poignant book. It's a collective responsibility. The industrial sector has almost disappeared in France, and we can understand the extent of the damage. And we need to build industrial sovereignty, industrial jobs, industrial skills, competencies, industrial cooperation. Jacques, you have the floor. So I worked for Valeo for 13 years, not 6 years. Oh, sorry about that. We have to be humble when it comes to making an assessment. I'm not going to answer the question in which sectors we need to invest, but I would rather revisit the different topics that have grabbed the headlines, that have grabbed the political economic headlines at the École des Mines. We were talking about nodules, semiconductors, nanoparticles. Now we are talking about the Internet of Things, hydrogen. But what about these topics, issues? Are these full-fledged topics or not? I mean, in the past, we focused on some issues, but these were not forthcoming. I'm under the impression that we're beating about the bush. So if Benoît Potier, the CEO of Air Liquide, would listen to me, it would be crying foul. So in the meantime, we haven't seen the smartphones coming. Amazon, we haven't seen Apple specify coming. So when we cast a future-oriented eye, most of the time we're wrong. And you talked about in-depth transformation of Valeo. So 13 years after, we are the leader in electric cars, and we are the leader in driving assistance models. You have some sensors being fitted to a car, being the ears and eyes of a car. But 13 years before, we thought that there were some trends emerging in the field of electricity. We have the golden nugget, the stop and start system that we developed with Peugeot. Basically, when you stop at when you stop, basically the engine switched off. So when we presented this new innovation, people said that's not great, diesel is better, it's a better invention, so we stop and start mechanism was not really popular. And remember, then there was the Dieselgate, and all of a sudden our innovation was popular. So we created a JV with Siemens on low voltage. So we are the leader in the electric car industry. And at that time, 10 years ago rather, people didn't talk about electric cars. Of course, CO2 emissions was the topic of the day. This was our motto at Valeo. But today, people want to ban thermal vehicles, internal combustion engine powered vehicles. So it's very difficult, to anticipate. We have to be ready when the market is there. Why France can or can't be at the forefront of industrialization? This is something that is necessary. So roots are important. In the SBF 100, in the CAC 40, we have global leaders, global businesses with French roots, and they can expand throughout the world. And it's a great asset for France. But there are four dimensions that we need to consider. If we want to get a solid industrial base in France, we need to have entrepreneurs. If you want to transform the French society, we need to have entrepreneurs. We have lots of civil servants, and now we have entrepreneurs. We have 25 unicorns, and we can be very proud of this in-depth transformation, the ability to create from scratch companies or businesses, a unicorn company, i.e. virtual or actual capitalization of $1 billion. These unicorns didn't exist 10 years ago, and we have 24 unicorns or so we can be very proud of that. Then science. Basic science is key in laboratories, public and private laboratories. You have applied R&D at Valeo. We devoted 12% of our earnings to R&D, and the stock market price was affected. At Valeo, we developed lots of technological platforms, the best in the world, and I can tell you that it's a good bedrock if you want to start. So science entrepreneurs are key. Allow me to interrupt you. So to do what you've achieved, so you gambled on R&D, so you developed some platforms with a scientific background, but did you get the right people, the right skilled people? Do we have enough gray matter in order to solidify the R&D departments at Valeo? Of course, yes. Of course, we have 50% of research in France, and in France we managed to fetch skilled people in terms of soft mechatronics. Of course, we're equipped with those skills, and these technological assets should be beefed up. So, of course, we need to teach maths more at schools, but we need to increase the relevance of sciences and maths in schools and universities. Today, it's a little bit more difficult because the turnover is high. But back to the entrepreneurs and science entrepreneurs. Of course, we have lots of science entrepreneurs in the world. What is important is to get a financial ecosystem in order to support these changes. And there's another topic that is important: stop to bureaucracy. So in our country, there's too much red tape. We have lots of regulations. Even when the companies are not in a position to comply with these regulations, production costs have never been so high in the world. I'm talking about our costs. Payroll taxes are too high. Wage costs are too high in France. But of course, we have to be humble. We need to work on the ecosystem that will enable those sectors to emerge. So there is no inexorable trend. So France can be reindustrialized if we can work on the 4 points that you've mentioned. Yes, there is no doubt about it. But these issues, they should be dealt with collectively. You have great companies, great businesses, fantastic, outstanding entrepreneurs, business leaders, but they need to stay in France. And of course, the French base and the international base should be furthered. I talk with the different business leaders in France, and they are well aware that the French roots are pivotal in terms of growth, and very few people think that if you are not a French company, you cannot develop. That's not true. So, Nicolas, from Isalt, you've been invested in French companies, in small companies, industrial, technological companies. Nicolas, for you, in order to develop new industrial sectors, in order to relocate industrial activities in France, do you think that we have the financial ecosystem so you support innovative industrial projects? So what is the outlook? What are the difficulties that you're contending with in order to move up to scale and to make sure that things are tangible? Thank you, Vincent, for these questions. I will give you some answers, and I will be humble, as Jacques said. So I will say a few words about Isalt and our approach. And you will notice that I'm in line with the previous speaker in terms of what needs to be implemented to reindustrialize the country. So Isalt, so we have a purpose, a long-term investment in French companies, in French capital companies who are supported by 7 insurance companies in France. And there are some representatives in the room, and I like to say hello to them. So the idea is to provide stable capital to the long-term shareholders. It's important to have long-term shareholders and to have solid roots. So we are a shareholder of Valeo. We've invested in a technological company, but we invested in a semiconductor company, Soltech, and it's a high added value business, and they invest hundreds of millions of euros in Grenoble plants and factories, and there is some public assistance, and this is something that we need to take into account. Moreover, to echo what has been said earlier, as far as I'm concerned, in France there's a good momentum in terms of industrial projects, very positive momentum. As a financier, as investor, this is something that we look at very closely. Today's industry is no longer taboo. I concur with Jacques. He talked about unicorns. These are digital technological unicorns, but in France it would be a good idea to have industrial companies that could be created, providing benefits. What are we talking about? Energy, carbon-free energy, technology, health, food industry, agri-food industries. So in terms of investments, there are some projects in those fields. Those projects are not all mature, but these projects are being implemented in France, and they are spearheaded by entrepreneurs, by business leaders. That's an interesting trend, and I talked about that this morning. Elon Musk did a lot for the industry. When I consider the mindset, he has unleashed new patterns. So when you are an industrialist, you have to take risks, and when you take risks, you can have some industrial developments through innovation, technology, and decarbonization. Why is it a positive? Why is it good? Because there's an ambition to do something important and to provide solutions to our issues connected with the transition, a topic that we touched upon repeatedly at X. So if you consider the creation of companies, there's some symbiotic relationship in terms of energy sourcing, in terms of energy recycling, in terms of finished products, in terms of partnerships. You have lots of industrialists who are bigger, and we are liaising with the academic world and the research world. So these are laboratories that are pivotal. Last point, in the field of decarbonization, there are lots of projects that are being established. What do we need? In the long haul, we need industrial successes in France in order to set in motion a new movement. We need different dimensions, facilities, infrastructures. There should be local companies, local factories. When I discuss with the business leaders and entrepreneurs, things are much easier than in the past, though the process is protracted, but people are no longer afraid of industry. We need skilled people. That's not easy to get skilled people. This is the main concern of these industrialists. You need funding for the industry. Long-term funding is necessary. So it means that we need to ponder over the funding of developments. Nicolas Dubourg.
Traditionally in economy, we know that we need human capital, and if I understand well, there was sort of like something that triggered things in terms of the mentality. Something changed, something happened. It's easier today. Maybe there's a new generation of entrepreneurs for whom industry is a future and a perspective, the immediate perspective of decarbonization, which encourages to increase performances on that aspect. Would you say that in your field the capital is available, that you can accompany projects, that enterprises can find money insofar as there's a project, innovative project, possibility for localization, something that is deserves investments and is worthwhile to invest in? Well, it's a fairly recent phenomenon. I would say it's not. I wouldn't say that everything is solved or what we see, and I think that's interesting. In France, there's a new recovery plan for at the horizon of 2030 with very well targeted topics, and when you fit in with this framework, you can get subsidies in terms of capital, in terms of the funding to develop your industry, and it helps to take the industrial risk. It's important to have these mechanisms available. Second point, which in my opinion will facilitate investments in time. Several of these projects are based on the fact that productions are pre-sold. And once they are ready, they are purchased by great order givers, and they correspond to the to needs for final projects, where they're manufactured under certain standards, they comply with the expectations of the final consumers, and so they enable to lift the risks. It's a bit like infrastructure, for example, in which you know that behind it the people who will use this infrastructure. So there are elements today that in time, I'm sure will help finding financing, but we'll have to be bold, more than we are today. I would say that those who want to ask questions, don't hesitate. In order for those who are watching this remotely on the Rencontre website, I will transmit your questions to our guests. So the floor is now to Mckenna. Capital. I said that you arrived in France in Orléans at the age of 20. You created an investment capital company, big company. And what can we do on the trans-border activities or form alliances that transform national realities through logic of investment and innovation? How do you see this perspective? Do you also believe that in France we can find new sectors, industrial sectors, when you consider the challenges we're faced with, like decarbonization, energy topics, and mobility aspects? Are these sectors where in France, in your opinion, we can find projects, develop these projects, and rebuild an industrial activity? Thank you, Vincent. My answer is yes. Before talking about new sectors, I think that geographically speaking, France is a good place to produce. For example, I'm Chinese, and the French soil is so fertile that even China, Chinese created a company that's Capital. So the soil is the land is very fertile here. And I'd like to pay a tribute to Jacques, first of all, because when I started 7 years ago here in Cathay Innovation, it's the first French industrialist who places trust in us, and he believed that at the border of borders, we can innovate. And for innovation, if you talk about sectors, there's no need to insist on new or old sectors. There's not a new world and an old world. I think that with existing industries, we can also find new ideas and new projects. So what are the unsatisfied sectors to which the industry can respond? Thanks to the digitalization, we can know precisely what people are expecting, what the consumer is expecting. So in innovation, there are two ideas, either technological breaking. I think that breakthrough, for example, innovation in the economic field can be immediate, or it can eventually have an immediate effect. But on technology, a rupture, well, it takes time. And you need the basis. I think France has an advantage compared to any other country, is that you have a training system, a high-quality training system, educational system. And I was saying that contrary to what you can think, I think it's a country that's highly tolerant, very open. Look at the proof. You accept me to be here. So you have to be very open-minded. So anyway, I was talking about the borders of borders. I think an innovation can come at the border, at the limit of different sectors and in different geographies. And the second topic I wanted to highlight is that maybe we need to stop to distinguish, to make distinctions with borders. The French can produce in France, the Americans can produce in France, and the Chinese can also produce in France. So the idea is, how can you be smart enough so far as, for example, I'll take an example. Today we talk about energy, new energies, and for example, the production of batteries or solar panels. Of course, with the money you have, you can build a plant in Orléans, for example. I'm a Chinese in Orléans myself. But the question is, there's a lot of know-how on solar panels, and notably in China, there's a lot of know-how. But you can think, okay, we will disrupt, we will break the bridges. But sometimes you need to understand that the supply chain cannot be generated instantaneously. You can't just say, okay, I'll transfer everything here or there. No, you have to be serious. You always have to stay open-minded and tolerant, and accept. And that's what you did again. To foreigners to come here to create their own their companies, but some countries must accept the same. I support reciprocity, and I advocate that building bridges. Geopolicies is trying to build bridges, but sometimes a link of confidence, trust is developed with time. It's like a tunnel. It's very efficient. It resists, and that's what Cathay did. With 1,300 people, 9 offices, and we help entrepreneurs to be very Americans in the U.S., very Chinese in China, and of course other companies that come to France. Well, we contribute to make them French. So I think it's a recipe to find the right sectors, so that we show the way for tomorrow. We feel like having faith in what you're saying, to accept what you're saying, and openness, capacity to get along, and invest on projects without taking into consideration borders or limits. But aren't we in a period where it's the opposite that's taking place? We have a will to recover the national sovereignties or the regional sovereignties, and we see that we were subject to a lot of difficulties through the pandemic, through the issue of energy today, and we see that each region today is trying to play its own card, to develop its assets, but to work firstly at the regional rather than at the international level. If you think of the first globalization model, the real internalization goes through the localization. If the localization wants to have a certain perennity, well, it has to be international. Very good to grow tomatoes. The shock maybe is better for zucchinis, but we can't eat tomatoes and tomatoes every day. Sometimes I need zucchinis. So instead of making barriers between all the gardens, I prefer to lift the barriers and trade with Jacques. So maybe I'm going to change jobs and produce the zucchinis. No, we're meant to work together. Humanly speaking, we can't break the links. It doesn't work. But there's geopolitics, and sometimes things are complicated. But we like your metaphor, with the tomatoes and zucchinis. We like that here. Fatma Maraghi, you are come from Tunisia. You are the director of the International Integration Laboratory, interested in comparative advantage, but you're also interested, notably, in the region you live in, and that will tomorrow see hundreds of thousands of young people who will arrive on the labor market that you'll have to accompany, try to orient towards employment sectors and competencies that take up the challenges to which we're facing. What do you think of our idea of industrial relocalization as seen from the other shore of the Mediterranean in a country that's dear to us, Tunisia? Thank you very much. Thank you for your question. In fact, when you look at the title of this session, I thought that it would be a bit too ambitious, new sectors to produce tomorrow. Well, I don't know if I can answer this question, but at least I'll try to propose some tracks for reflection in the sense that I'm very sensitive to the international economy. It's a sector in which I operate, I work. We always learned and we teach our students that this issue of specialization that is redundant, in fact, and it's been the case in all times. A country, what sector will it specialize? And the question is yet very urgent today with the crisis that we're going through. In fact, we teach our students to do things simply. One of the basic theories that is comparative advantages tells us that it's better for each country to specialize in those sectors where it is the most competent, where it's the cheapest to produce. And so I make reference to the revealed comparative advantage, which is a ratio that enables to calculate for a given sector your performance level compared to your sector in your country with relation to the performance in another region of the world or the world itself. If you do better than in the rest of the world, then you should specialize in this sector. However, today we are faced with crisis that we all know, the COVID crisis, for example, the pandemic, and also the war that broke through in Ukraine. And I think that everybody here agrees to say that we can no longer afford to stay confined in this comparative advantage theory, because today, in fact, countries are trying to improve their resilience with a view to the shocks that we don't know. We know the recent ones, but we don't know what tomorrow is made of. As the Prime Minister of France just said a few hours ago, we don't know what shocks we'll have to face tomorrow to get prepared today. However, we need to work on what we already know. We need to focus on that. And in response to your question, for the region I know and the region I come from, which is the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, where by 2050 we'll have something like 300 million young workers who will arrive on the labor market. What will we offer them? You said 300 million? Colossal, enormous, gigantic. And we have to really give a lot of thought on that, even we're a little late. And so following these two recent crises, the world, what did the world need? In fact, we needed sanitary help. We needed digitalization, IT, so that we continue to work, the platforms. Two sectors came out of that, the health sector and the digitalization sector. There's another imperative that should be added to this, that is following the climate change that we are experiencing. It's renewables, it's ecology, green energies on which we need to work without any further delay. And it's a sector that's very important, as important as the ethics. Oh, the computer, the new sectors, digitalization sector, for example, computer sectors. We can also talk about circular economy, information technology, and so on. But to prepare all this, we need to give some thought on the sector of education. How should we prepare the educational sector, whether public or private? What do we do to better train these people, the young people, to educate them and to ensure the vocational training, so that those young people are always updated to face the shocks, whether negative or positive. Unfortunately, what we went through in the recent years are negative shocks that were felt by all. And so that's at the level of services. We can also talk about those sectors, good producing sectors. What goods will we produce from now on? We know as of today that what we're producing for the international market is it's not a standard exchange selling raw material to get finished products. Today, international trade is done based on international value chains. Each country will produce a little part of something, like a part of a plane, part of a computer, part of a mobile phone, and they're all assembled somewhere else where it's the cheapest to do that task. We saw that during the COVID crisis, and also with the Ukraine war. We saw that this creates a lot of vulnerability for countries at large, for the MENA region and for Tunisia in a more specific manner. So instead of answering to the question of what are the sectors of tomorrow, I would say how we gain in agility to increase the resilience of these countries so they are able to face any shock, whether it's negative or positive for these countries. So producing according to these international value chains gives rise to a lot of vulnerability. We should be capable today of facing these vulnerabilities through a better agility, focusing on the sector of education. Thank you.
La santé.
So you've talked about health, imperious topics, health, digital technologies. These are resilience factors. Kevin Polizzi, when I introduced you, I said that you are the CEO of Unitel. You've just taken over the campus, and we are back in Aix-en-Provence because you have been at the helm of the innovation campus of Aix-en-Provence. So from regional to ultra-local, it's a place of innovation. It's a tangible experience and experiment. When you are a place for innovation, how can we marshal skills, competencies, capital, ideas, technologies? The objective is to get concrete reindustrialization projects. Hello, everyone. Delighted to be with you. What about the future? This is the question put by my children, I say that this is yesterday. So we've just emerged from COVID and we had to accept digitalization. But I think that we've saved 7 years because we are a paperless company and we can talk remotely. COVID might be behind us, but there's a new crisis coming in, inflation. With COVID, we accepted digitalization. With inflation, we'll have to accept innovation. At last, we'll have to change the way we work, the way we manage, the way we trade at the international level. I can tell you that we are witnessing a period whereby we can change everything. So we have to change our cars, we have to change our homes, we have to change the way we build things. And of course, we need to change the way we move. We need to change the way we work. We need to change the way we live. We have to focus on sustainable issues. Where do we need to invest? We need to invest in all kinds of fields because the world of the past will be transformed into the world of tomorrow because we have to change. But it's a pragmatic approach. So I spent 20 years in technology, in 5G, and we came up with usage innovations. So the Freebox Pro was marketed. We provided some innovation in IA, in data. So on Saturday evening, I'm with my friends and I tell them a story and they can't understand what I'm telling them. We don't talk about artificial intelligence during dinners, but now we have a camp. It's an opportunity. It's a campus for innovation. It's a local project, but the influence area is Southern Europe and Africa with an extended regional impact, and the idea is to roll out and disseminate know-how and expertise. Of course, we want to be able to grow. We want to be able to invest if we are not knowledgeable, and knowledge, know-how should be made accessible to everybody. We have different backgrounds, we have different careers, but we share the same will. The world is being transformed today. It's quite hot. Of course, in Aix-en-Provence in July, the temperature is quite hot, but in Dunkerque, if it is hot in September, of course, we'll have lots of question marks in our mind. So, of course, transformations are key, but transformations shouldn't be left in the hands of some people. And today we need to disseminate knowledge, know-how, because if you want to reinvest in the world, we have to create added value. Of course, it is said we need to do that, we should do this, we should do that. We know exactly where we are heading for, but we don't know how, and we don't know with whom. So today, what matters is to consider the camp as a place where private, public research associations are intertwined. But we need to go beyond a promise. The plan is called Next Generation. It is reminiscent of Star Trek. I'm not Elon Musk, we are French. So we are not Elon Musk, but how can we deploy and roll out quickly our technologies? The camp should be a flagship of French excellence at the international level. We have the researchers, we have the products, we have the ideas, we have the will, but we shouldn't sideline anyone. Intelligence, artificial intelligence enables young people from the suburbs to work in the telecommunications operations, and they are delivering some services. They will be designers in electronics, in mechatronics, in plastic management. The cost of carbon should be impacted on products and services, and there will be lots of products that we will be able to produce locally. So what is at stake? In order to build a plant from scratch, it will take between 7 and 10 years. So the person who is digging the foundations, he has waited for 3 years to get the administrative authorities, and it will take 4 years to design the processes in order to open the factory. I'm not going to tell you that it's too long, but as part of the industrial alliances in the current companies that will be redeployed, I think that 1 hectare, 1 acre should be made available for another company. It is faster to produce on a contaminated land than the opposite, and that's an opportunity. We can go further. Let's take the example of the camp. 7 acres in nature, in a great, magic, magnificent setting. The campus is unbelievable. 12,000 square meters of buildings in nature, amidst nature. So in 2017, you are a superhero if you do that. In 2022, you are a criminal. So it is not really fashionable, I mean, to build concrete buildings in nature, among nature, with a great architect who helped us. So what is at stake? We need to fast-track the French know-how. And we've been famed for that. French excellence is notorious. There are some international alliances on specific products. Of course, we need to keep our digital sovereignty. We have to decide by ourselves. Let us move ahead. We need to devote means to quantum, electronics, calculation, computing, infrastructures. There are things that people don't know. France is the 3rd largest country in terms of data centers. I mean, it was not deliberate. I mean, the nuclear energy was not really expensive, so people created data centers, but it's an asset that we can tap. We can use these basic facilities in order to create tens of thousands of jobs, in order to sort out the problems that we are currently contending with. Mr. Aschenbrohr, what is your take on that? And 2 questions. 1 question from the room. A question for you, Jacques. If you were to pick up an action in order to foster industrial action, is it private, is it public? And I listened to the different speakers. You have some cultural elements, cultural dimensions, mindset, training, and of course there's an issue of transformations. I mean, to transform a society of civil servants into a society of innovators. So there are some constraints with the political authorities. We expect a lot from political decisions. We expect a lot from the state. Maybe there should be more leeway for the private sectors. They shouldn't wait for the state to act in order to make decisions, to invest, to move ahead. Of course, we're not going to wait for the magic decision made by Paris, by Parliament, by regulations. So I will focus on value. 80 million spare parts are being made, and we have 2 billion spare parts coming in. In order to reorganize the supply chain, it would take years. So the time issue plays a key role. If we are to relocate, I'm not quite sure that it's an objective in itself. We need to have a 10 or 50-year time horizon. These are long processes. Regarding your question, of course, we are not waiting for the state to move ahead. And of course, we want the state to leave us in peace. So you were asked to identify some priorities. You've mentioned 4 priorities. So if we were to go further, is something has to be shared with the people in the audience. If you were to deliver a priority message, what would it be? In order to build a factory in plant, so you have to take a decision, then you have to wait for the authorizations, and it will take a lot of years. In China, in Shenyang, when you decide to invest in a company, in a factory, 80,000 square meters, it will take 8 months. And this example is a glaring example. In France, I mean, there's a lot of red tape, there's a lot of bureaucracy, and we will die from it. The world is moving fast, and the state should deliver some swift authorizations. If you want to get a passport, it will take time, weeks. In some countries, you can get a passport in 48 hours. So the administration in France is stifled with fewer professionals. I hope that there aren't too many civil servants in the room. I'm a former civil servant, so that's why I make that comment. But we've been talking about bureaucracy, red tape for quite a long time. We said that constraints should be lightened. If we don't do that, there will be a risk, there will be a big danger. So it's important to streamline and to simplify the processes. Nicolas Debourg, what is your take on that? The priorities, the supply chains, what is your perception? And the same question that I put to Jacques Aschenbroich, a message that you would like to put out, I mean, for those who are courageous enough to endure the heat, for people who are connected, in order to mobilize our mindsets, our energies, what would you say? Regarding the supply chains, regarding projects designed to create companies, plants and factories in France, in the field of energy, more mobility is required. We need to get some local facilities. There's something that I've noticed. We have a lot of red tape, a lot of bureaucracy. You have the Resilience on Climate Act that contains some constraints, but things move ahead when the local politicians provide some help. And when you get access to subsidies, the industrial projects are very cumbersome. It's a matter of organization. You need to liaise with suppliers. Access to energy is crucial. The ecosystem should be established very swiftly in order to get those projects up and running. It's crucial for these new and local industries. There's a topic that we haven't talked about. What about the social dimension? So you create jobs in some regions, jobs that are sorely lacking in these regions. People are happy because they can get jobs. So we need to be fast, and we need to fast track the whole process. Some decisions will have to be made. We need to take on board people. We need to nurture a dialogue with people regarding renewable energies. If you want to create a solar farm, and there are many examples in France, 1 gigawatt solar park in the Landes forest. But this farm is very useful because you have a carbon-free economy, and you can supply energy to the local areas, but you need to cooperate with the citizens. It's a matter of social acceptance. Of course, there's a need to talk to people. So we are almost done. Madam, do you want to add something? Regarding the global supply chain, had in mind a specific example. Tunisia, my country, depends on wheat from Ukraine. So we depend a lot on Ukrainian wheat, and we have huge surface areas with wheat, but these surface areas are not exploited because the prices are too low. And if you do the maths, farmers can't make a living, so they branch out to other crops. Allow me to highlight an example. given by Mrs. Lagarde. We want to make sure that local supply sources are closer. Nearshoring the supply sources should be closer, or you can buy products from local people, from local producers. That's very important for the Chinese. Over a period of 5 years in China, they should relocate some companies in order to get closer to Europe. So the same goes with Morocco. So it means that some companies and factories could be relocated next to Tunisia and the Mediterranean countries. So we're almost done, but we can continue to talk outside. Thank you for being with us, and I'd like to thank all of the different panelists.
Vous êtes tous tellement sages, là, vous m'impressionnez en fait, finalement. Même...
Okay, right, so good afternoon everyone. We're going to start this session. If we looked at the number of sessions devoted this year to social responsibility within companies, I think we would be impressed and see there is a change. And the topics of the sessions in X reveal progression in companies and an evolution of society as we try to understand it at the economic rencontre. During the session, we're going to look into something which is somewhat special, the mission-driven companies. This is under the Pacte law, allowing a company to assert a raison d'être. Typically, it can adopt statutes allowing it to be different from the traditional objectives of a company, like maximizing profit and growth, and adopt other objectives, the environmental, social, or the well-being of their employees. Faced with this new law, we could have several types of reactions. First one is to say, is it really any use? Is it really the purpose of a company or capitalism to look into this type of subject? We could also wonder, well, this is a marketing thing. We're just here to improve the image of a company, whether for customers or for the staff. And we could also say, well, no, it's no good, because in a way, companies have always contributed to common goods, but the legislative change, it just reflects the changes in society. To talk about all that and talk about these issues, my pleasure to have an exceptional panel, starting with Jean-Dominique Sénard, President of the Board of Directors at Renault Group. Then I have Alexandre Bompard, CEO of Carrefour Group, Clarisse Kopp, General Manager of Alliance Group, Alliance Trade, you changed your name, Chris Rocher, President of the Rocher Group, and Pascal Demurger, CEO of Maïf. And we have someone in line, Mr. Mckenna. I hope she understands it. Mr. Mckenna, you're a former Minister of Canada, and now she has created an NGO to defend the environment. So, Jean-Dominique Sénard, I'll start with you. No one has been able to avoid the fact that when the graduation is given in schools and prestigious universities, Polytechnique, HEC, the number of students rose up against the jobs for which they had been prepared. And they called upon a change, a bifurcation, saying that capitalism, the way it was, and businesses as they are, or as they, where they could have worked, were not capable of satisfying their expectations and their hopes. So, Jean-Dominique Sénard, are you hearing them? And if so, what do you want to answer? If I answered no to the question, I don't think it would be much more successful. We are in Aix-en-Provence, February 1789. Mirabeau was vociferating in the General Assembly for the États Généraux of Provence, saying we are losing the right to convince what you do not want to hear. So from that point of view, he was right. And things are not going to change. Of course, we hear the students. How could we be deaf and blind? All the more so because what they are saying is very often full of goodwill. Of course, we hold the questions regarding inclusion and ecology, solidarity, the there's only one subject where we can actually discuss, which is degrowth, and we'll get back to that. What they have to say is very direct and something that they feel very deeply. But I would like to pass on 3 messages to them. The first is that capitalism is evolving. Second, is that you mustn't pick the wrong battle. To get out of something is not the right battle. And the third one, yes, we're talking about mission-driven companies, essential issues, but I think we can go a little further. The first message is capitalism is evolving. And frankly, I can tell you that the panorama for a number of years has considerably changed. 4 years ago, when I was asking Nicole Nota on the question of the role of companies, we were not very comfortable. The topics that we just mentioned were not fashionable. Look what's happened in 4 years. The world has changed from that point of view, whether in the US, in Europe, in France in particular. Capitalism, or responsible capitalism, is making way. It's certainly moving. So don't talk about all the rules, the soft laws that exist. It's no good, you know. But we are well ahead. Things have moved, particularly in France. Sincerely, the world has changed. Responsible capitalism is beginning to create its furrow. It's with capitalism for sustainability, giving companies a kind of political role in brackets, so that everyone knows that companies play a central part in amongst all stakeholders. It's understood that not only are they there to make profit, but also deal with the environmental and social issues in their activity. This is really very strong in minds, and from a legislative point of view and in practice, this has given rise to extraordinary experiments that my colleagues will speak even better than I could. Capitalism is changing, it's moving, and even because we are talking about it, so it is an event, and that is very good news. Second message is, do not pick the wrong battle. It's not the subject to leave. Today, you cannot drop out. You cannot forget the initiatives which exist. When I think of what is happening in our companies, and sorry for talking about Renault because it's what I know best, but when I see the incredible efforts that we are making to win the battle for the future, to protect ourselves and protect ourselves against the shortage of raw materials, to make an example of a circular economy in the automobile world. See what's happening in France at the moment. I could talk about it for hours, what's going on. Batteries, cars, hydrogen, all these initiatives are there to remind us that we can really do something for the future. And we say to these young people, it's not time to give up. Please don't desert. We need you here and now. This isn't when we will win the future, because frankly, there will be no gifts. I know thousands of Indian and Chinese students who are hungry, and they only have one idea, is to do what you don't want to do by dropping out. So I say, be careful. Your intentions may be good. The problem is that they won't last long, so please don't drop out now. When I was a student, I must admit, wasn't last week, but there were already dropouts, and it was long after May 1968. It was self-consumption on the Larzac plateau. Not everyone was very solid in terms of convictions, and generally it didn't end up very well. So please, young people, hold on. It's not time to let go. We need you. Every time you let go, the outer world, the rest of the world, will jump on the chance to create technologies and the future, allowing us to settle the problems that you are the first to talk about. Third message is, yes, we have created mission-driven companies, and those around me know it as well as I do. I'm very happy because this topic came up when we worked with Nicole Nota 3 years ago. It didn't exist in France, and now I think it's developing very nicely. See, it's happening. It gives a meaning. So what's the answer to the question of these young people? There's a lot of expectation. We want to give us a meaning, and the mission-driven companies can give us this meaning. If responsible capitalism it comes up in the future, it will because there's a question of profit sharing. Hopefully not shocking anyone here, but we need to take an extra step, otherwise we will not be credible. Let me advertise for the Conseil Institute. We've produced a document on participation and how to develop it. Must all be vectors to carry these ideas. Questions of profit sharing are now at the heart of our political and economic discussion. If responsible capitalism means something, we need to go further and deal with it reasonably, intelligently. And my last thing I would say to these dropouts, do not forget Europe. Everything that I said, if we don't do it in a European framework, we will lose the battle. It is in the social heart of Europe, and European culture is the heart of all this. And I'll say with all the blogs from North America or Asia, so if Europe cannot have its own social culture, it does not refer to the Treaty of Rome to talk about the social market. It's a strong culture shared by everyone. This is where things are happening. We need young people to do it because we might not be able to do it. Thank you for that. And I always say, come on, be strong, because it's not the right time to give up. My answer to you. Thank you very much. Each 5 minutes. If you clap for another 5 minutes for each time, we'll never manage. Thank you for these words about the industry. Industry is definitely transforming. Alexandra is trade moving as well. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here in Aix, up on the front here with my colleagues. And this would really be a place for me to advertise the transformation of Carrefour regarding CSR. We all share convictions. We have to report about the companies, mission-driven companies, giving us tools to extend our CSR commitments. And this has been a tremendous progression. And this is a platform here where I could tell you everything we're doing in retail. But my conviction, beyond the raison d'etre that we have adopted, beyond the CSR and the food transition we've seen and the commitments of management, so to come back to what I would say, it's a bit different. For me, there are 3 major issues today. Today, are we having an incongruous debate today? We're in 2022, the war is at the doors of Europe, the succession of crises in all the domains, and having a debate today as if we were in 2019. So is it a bit incongruous to talk about these questions today? And here my question would be no, it's not incongruous. You know that in emergency situations are here, the young people want it, we have the climatic emergency, and company must make commitments. In every cycle of activity, we have adopted our raison d'etre. When we were in the worst possible condition, we decided to make it about turn. And we have a provocation. Are we making these commitments because it's in our interest? Or because we are pushed by a kind of late Abbé Pierre charity organization? Is it our responsibility, our interest, or are we making different commitments? And here I will give you my answer. I would be a dream of waking up every morning telling myself I'm going to change the planet, that I want a better world. But actually, it's not my job. My responsibility is to manage a company and create value. Create value for all of the stakeholders, shareholders, employees, all of the industrial world. That is my responsibility. That is my role. It is not my vocation to speak politically. I am there to create value. That is the role of a business. And so I don't get up in the morning to say I must make a strong commitment because I've decided it. I do this because I'm asked by the investors, by customers, by my personnel. So it's important not for the debate to be wrong, to be sincere in our commitments. The commitments we are making are commitments which come along with capitalism. And these commitments contribute very powerfully because we have a worldwide size, because we take the whole of the ecosystem along to transform things. And I'm doing it because it's my interest to make these commitments. I think the more we say it, the more sincere we are, the more we can avoid being told that we are greenwashing and not sincere. And the third major question from the debate asked today is, in the end, standards, statuses, all these mission-driven companies and so on, this is what is generating the commitment. Well, at the risk of shocking those the others on the platform, I consider that not at all. This is the company which makes me do it. It is for instance, my customers say, I want well-being for animals. Customers say that I want less food waste, reduce the plastic, and my staff say be better in terms of diversity, be better in inclusion, be better in gender equality, on disability. I don't believe in a standard. When I've gone, I've seen other roundtables say, should the state define the new role of businesses? Capitalism knows how to adapt. Capitalism is both the interest of each company, value creation, but also conciliating this with interests of society. Marx said that capitalism has an incredible survival instinct. We are reconciling our own instincts with the wishes of the society, environmental issues, and I believe strongly in that. Leverage for transformation is not regulation, not extra standards, not an extra status. It is our personnel, our customers, our stakeholders, the industrial world that we work with, who are encouraging us to change and evolve. When you look at it from this point of view, the interests of a company, we have a great chance of being more credible and taking all the social issues along with us.
Merci beaucoup. Clarisse.
Thanks a lot. Clarisse Kopp, are you shocked by the observations made by the previous speaker? But as a financial company, do you contribute to the creation of value? And do you think that you contribute to the common good? I do agree with what Alexandre said. Each sector, each business has a mission, and to fulfill the mission as best as possible, most of the time it's a matter of making profits, but profits are being used to invest, to commit, to innovate, to redeem your debt, to pay your taxes. And at the end of the day, you participate in the funding of public service. You are instrumental in financing social bodies. So in a natural way, you contribute to the improvement of society. It has always been the case. Companies had to embark upon citizens' missions, but they didn't have to say it loud and clear. This is what shareholders want. The shareholders, these are not disembodied people. These are people who save. These people can and trust their money to us so that we can make the most of this money. The Alliance Group collects a lot of savings with insurance life products, and it's a natural movement. Customers want us to invest in virtuous companies with some women at the board. No children should work for these companies, but we don't need a state intervention. The private sector is rather efficient when it comes to managing these transformations and changes. There is no wastage. A company that wastes too much, I mean, the company will close down. So the companies are instrumental in changes and transformations. We are an insurer, we are an insurance company, and we have to make sure that the suppliers will be paid by the customers. It's very simple, but we are present everywhere, and we provide insurance to people to the tune of $100 billion. So we have to develop trade, we have to develop economies, so we have to develop wealth. It's a great mission, it's a great purpose. I'm very proud of that, and the same goes for Alliance. The mission statement of Alliance is to make the most of the money that is being entrusted to the company. So, of course, a company is not called upon to be an NGO. When a company does to merge with lots of diversified objectives and goals, at the end of the day, you will lose out in terms of your purpose. And basically, we will move away from our purpose. So, I do agree with what Alexandre said. So I want to again say what has been said by the previous speaker. Thanks a lot. Brice Rocher, you are in favor of this status, mission-driven company. This is a purpose that you've decided to embed. And to what extent do you disagree with what has been said? Hello, everyone. Very happy to be with you. And I'm delighted to share my beliefs regarding the topic. Objectively, at the end of the day, a mission-driven company is a matter of leadership. It's a matter of personal belief nurtured by the manager. But let us focus on the mission-driven companies and the status. It's a kind of guarantee to be protected against ill winds. Basically, there are some constraints, but with those constraints, you have to establish a mission-driven council, and the objectives should be in line with the status, with the purpose, and then you have a third party, an independent third party that will certify your objectives. So you are policing yourself to a certain extent, and that's quite positive. Following the report that was issued by Jean-Dominique and Nicole Notin, I produced a report 2 years after the Pacte law. And I didn't have the benefit of hindsight, but I conducted more than 200 interviews. Of course, you are not obliged to be a mission-driven company in order to define a purpose and to make sure that your company wages a fight. So I am at the helm of a family company. So I wanted to have a supervisory board with different people who are not in the company in order to deal with my compensation payment, variable pay. It's just a guarantee. People won't criticize me for my compensation payment. There are people outside the company who will pass judgment. And with the mission-driven council, that's the same approach. So what can I say about a mission-driven company? Very honestly, corporate culture has a legal tool. So what does it mean? So you can develop corporate culture. All the stakeholders, all the employees are brought together. The employer's brand is being beefed up. When you define your purpose, it means that your company will be waging a fight. You cannot wage different fights, but I think that it's very useful for your company to wage a fight. And what is a purpose for me? So for the employees, the purpose has to do with the pride of being within the company. So you can choose the company in which you're going to work, especially if you know the fight that is being waged by the company. It's like a North Star a North Star. So the sense of belonging, the sense of pride is key. I think that the mission-driven company is a great tool in order to beef up corporate culture by implementing some guarantees with some strings attached. And I do agree with you. So every year I come here and I think that there's a positive trend. So before it was storytelling, now it is story doing. So we need to turn words into deeds. And what is important is action. We have to be action oriented. If you consider the purpose, if the purpose is hot wind or is hot air, the mission driven purpose is rock solid. Pascal Demerger. So you think that the state has to go further in order to make sure that companies do the common good. So good afternoon to all of you. I've understood the difficulties. If we were to ask different people, we would get a similar answer. Companies have a role to play in society. Businesses and companies cannot be an object geared towards its own objectives, growth, profitability. Growth and profitability are essential in terms of corporate sustainability, but we are witnessing an extraordinary moment in capitalism, in corporate life. Why is it extraordinary? Because at the end of the day, the company is called upon to play a social role, and I would even say a political role. And I can tell you that it's not a matter of knowing how the company is behaving. Has the company created the relevant foundation in order to fulfill the CSR objectives and goals? Not at all. What is the political impact of the company through its business activity? What is the role of a company for society in terms of social and environmental dimensions? And if we consider that the company has a political responsibility, and I think that the survival of a company depends on its ability to shoulder this responsibility. I do concur with you. I don't know how to recruit talent. I cannot retain talent if my employees have not a meaningful mission with the company. It's not a matter of optimizing the annual results or handing out dividends to the shareholders. No company will be able to convince customers in the future if the brand is considered to be a brand with a negative impact on the environment, on a negative impact on societal and social issues. And people do relate to those issues. And there are lots of examples in many sectors. I'm not going to mention names. The stock market price collapsed to the tune of 75% for some companies. Why? Because the companies didn't behave properly, didn't behave in a dignified fashion. So dividends versus dignity, this is what is at stake. But of course, we are companies, and a company, in order to survive, a company should be profitable and should grow. And many companies, many businesses, they have a capitalistic structure whereby they have some shareholders. These shareholders, whether it's legitimate or not, I mean, the shareholders, they want to get dividends, they want to get higher dividends, and they pay attention to the stock market price. And you have to consider their time frame. The time frame is very short. The main issue with capitalism, it's its inability to transcend short term. And I think that the state can help us. There's a swing of the pendulum. So if you want to implement some changes, there should be new regulations regarding some specific topics in 2022, given the ecological urgency. Is it acceptable to give public subsidies without considering the ecological impact of a company? So public subsidies should be based on the behavior of companies. So, for example, if you consider public orders in France, most of the time they don't take into account social and environmental criteria. Let's say that you have a company that pollutes, that relocates. At the end of the day, the company will bring about some taxes. So I think that the level of taxes on companies should be different according to the behavior of companies. It's not a matter of putting some constraints. Of course, it's a matter of incentives. The company should move ahead, but I think that if the state implements some incentives, the company will be able to move ahead far quicker, much quicker. So, Catherine Mckenna, are you with us? Yes, from Canada.
I'm very pleased to take part. I wish I could be in Aix, but I know it's very hot there. So it's good that I'm after Pascal. I look at things in a different way, differently from others. I was a minister, and as a minister, I saw that there are a lot of promises coming from the company, and we see some action. We have some companies with us now who do a lot. But with climate change, it's not a very difficult challenge. The greenhouse gas emissions go either up or down. I think we need to see more transparency, more action, because what is the reality? We are seeing promises to act on action by company. 702 companies have a promise. In the Forbes 2000, only half of them important promises. Only half of them have promises for immediate action. So we need more extension, we need more action. What's happening to the planet? We're all seeing it. We can see an acceleration of climate change. We're seeing floods, we're seeing heat, where so people can no longer live in some areas. We need to move faster. And for me, when I was a minister, I always said, it makes no difference for me why people are doing things regarding climate change. But as greenhouse gases must drop, because by 2030 we need to divide these greenhouse gas emissions by 45%, and now it's still increasing. And with the war in Ukraine, with Russia, there are people who are getting an edge here. There's no so much using fossil energy to produce energy, so there are a lot of voluntary commitments. I like to see that, and I think it is something that the young are asking for, customers are asking for it, and it is a major risk if you don't work on climate change, because the capitalistic system will have to adjust very quickly to the major changes we're going to see. So if we see the temperature going up more than 1.5 degrees, we have a long way from where we ought to be, which is why the Secretary General, with 18 experts of the whole world, coming from business, from environmental groups, from developed countries and developing countries, to have stricter and clearer standards. It's also a question of competitiveness. I know you have to look. I don't have a problem with companies making money. It's normal, but we know that so it's important for them to work on reducing greenhouse gases. Yes, there is greenwashing. There are fossil energy companies who they are working on reduction. It's why the regulation makes a big difference, because it will be very clear how we can be sure that companies do reduce their greenhouse gases if they do the work themselves, not just buying credit so that they can pollute. They must work in a better way. So, I've heard net zero promises. We had to work on an expert group. So I didn't hear who because of the line. It's too bad. So, sorry. So I'm here with the companies, alongside them. I think we can regulate, but it's also good to have a voluntary work on this. Unfortunately, we couldn't hear the end of the presentation perfectly, so I'm sorry to cut in, but thank you very much. Maybe a question? If you can bring a microphone. I agree with both visions mentioned. I think they're complementary, particularly with your comment at the end, Mr. Rocher, when you say if the mission is honey, the mission, which is more humanitarian, is royal jelly. The question is, we said it's linked with the leadership of the manager. This is true, but who is going to define the mission? Is it the manager? The CEO doesn't stay for life. It changes depending on the companies. General manager is the same. Should it be the board of directors, the staff? When a manager comes along, defines a mission, he's been recruited according to the mission that he wants to carry. That's my question for the five of you. Who do you think should define the mission? Or who defines the social objectives? The manager, the company, or the world in a way? And how do we really deal with the externalities coming from capitalism? Dominique, the others can answer. The answer for me is clear. Especially not the managers. It is basic work which should be inspired by the managers, but done by the teams, whatever their level of responsibility in the company. At Michelin, it took us 3 years, maybe say it's a bit of a long time, to get to a sentence which summarizes the reason being of Michelin must offer everyone a better way to go ahead. It took a long time maybe to get there, but behind these 3 years, there were debates that you can't even imagine what the debates were. In China, where people were working after hours to work on the subject. To give you an example, it created a kind of atmosphere in the company, an incredible commitment, even before the raison d'être was born. I could say the same for Renault, who finally have a raison d'être. So I took now a year and a half. I didn't want us to move too fast. It's a tremendous work. You've got the roots of a company, you've got this Northern Star, as you said, and not the manager or the CEO. At the end, someone say, that's it, and I know who said that's it in 2 cases I mentioned, but the other work was done by others. Alexandre. I think we all have more or less the same thing to say. Jean Dominique have perfectly summed up the way that you adopt raison d'être for choice. I think it's a multiple answer depending on the company. If it's a startup, generally it will be the entrepreneur who will have it in him. Wherever I agree with what is said, it has to be something which is collective, because once again, to develop culture internally, for me, for the collaborators in the company. If I take the example of the Rocher group, of course, it took us a year with different people from the company. It really was something which was very collective, but we started from the roots of the company, the entrepreneur. So it's my grandfather who created the company, and the mission of Rocher Group is to reconnect men and women to nature in the metaverse world, which seems quite useful. So this results from the personal experience that my grandfather experienced when he was 14. He always had fairly serious health issues, such as parents had to homeschool him. He couldn't go to school, and so there was a very strong link between him and his father. But his father died when he was 14, 1944, a small village in Brittany at La Gacilly, and he went to the forest. He spent his days in the forest, and this brought him a sort of comfort, consolation. And he became aware at the time that nature could have a positive impact on our well-being. And in return, he wanted to act for the nature. What seems important to me is that to determine a raison d'être, you need to do it collectively, of course. But you have to start first from the roots, the values, the DNA of the entrepreneur or the company. Secondly, it should answer a future challenge and challenge today. So we must say that today we tend to have chase nature from our life. It should also be based on values which don't change over time, although our business models change constantly. The values should not change. And fourth, a small style exercise. Once you have prepared your raison d'être, I would encourage you to draft it on on paper belonging to your main competitor. If they could take it on board, well, you have to start again. So the idea is still keep economic performance. You don't want to drive the company into the ground. That will want to make it sustainable, to get profit. I've spoken to 200 actors. Very often there's a risk of a legal risk or risk of image, which is a real one. But my strong conviction is that a company can fly only if it has customers, but it exists only if it's made of men and women, talents, even more so, and have the values as a reason for being. Some examples, we look at Aigle, TR Partners, Danone, Ecovadis, Maïf, the Rocher Group, and so on. We have all kinds of, got SMEs, only one unicorn, only one CAC 40 company. These companies are still there. So, Pascal Dumerger, say a question. Who decides? It is up to the companies to decide what is right. Clearly, there's a distribution between the state and the company. The state needs to define a target in a way, and the companies will define the road to get there. It's everything that's been said about the way inside a company you can define your mission, raison d'être. I can only agree with it. You know, there was a question of serenity. Depending on if it's the CEO defines it, if it's the board, what happens when the CEO leaves? It's one of the interests, I think, of the status as a mission-driven company, because there's transparency, because the actual statutes, constitution of the company has changed. the fact that you make public that you have become a mission-driven company. You're also publishing the external auditor's report will come and check that you have met the objectives defined. It means that you're creating something which is irreversible. Maïf, you were saying, all the group Rocher have become mission-driven companies. I can't imagine Maïf in a few years explaining that we will no longer be a mission-driven company. So it's necessarily something sustainable in the status. Mrs. Klaraskov, the word that for me, it's the customers. I think no company without customers, that is where the mission should come from. Alexandre, do you agree with that? A couple of words, because I'm holding and not waiting for the state to define my mission, my responsibility. I consider it is the role of the board of directors, the managers, the personnel. And I'm in I've seen 20 laws over the last 20 years. I'm a bit wary of new normatives, new laws. Secondly, I think we must be careful not to lead it to believe there's an ethical difference between companies, not bad or good companies. There's not a good company which is mission-driven and the other one which is a listed company. When the question came up about staying in Russia, there were state companies, mission-driven, listed companies. They all answered according to a number of concerns, to public opinion, customers, staff, and everyone made a decision according to all this, not because of their status, not because of mission or anything. I think you have to be careful with this idea. There will be ethical companies and others are non-ethical. I think you have to be careful about that. Well, thank you. It's my responsibility to close this great session. We didn't have enough time. Thank you all. Thank you to the panelists. And thank you all for your questions and your attention.
Bonjour.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being with us. I know that it's hot. I know that you've taken part in thrilling debates. Thank you for being with us. We'll be talking about a significant topic, that of training, that of companies and businesses. Over the past 2 days, we've noticed that the way we relate to work has changed, and companies were hard-pressed to recruit people. In order to talk about the way people relate to companies, we talk about training. So we have extraordinary panelists. We have 5 men, 1 woman. Florence Lussman, you are the president of the French Insurance Federation. Hats off to you because you've just been re-elected. Then we have Stéphane Carcillo, who is an economist. He's the head of the employment division of OECD, an associate professor at Sciences Politiques. Marc Ferracci, member of parliament. Also an economist specializing in training. He spent some time in the ministerial staff departments with Muriel Pénicaud, who was the Minister of Work. He worked with Prime Minister Castex. Christian Schmidt de la Brélie, the CEO of Clésia, Benotest, the Unitary Trade Union Federation, Cyril Zimmerman. You created a platform, you founded a platform in this region to kickstart our debates and discussions. Let's have an overview of the situation. Stéphane Carcillo, you will set the background information. I'm not going to flood you with figures. This is the end of the day. It's late, but there will be great transformations in the years to come. And this is the topic of the rencontre. There are some pressing needs in terms of training because of COVID. With COVID, the way we work has changed. People worked from home and companies decided to embed new technologies. So people had to be trained to new technologies. Have in mind climate change. And with climate change, companies will have to adopt green strategies, and they will have to change the way they work. In 2050, most employees will be over 50. So all these people will have to be trained so that they can continue to work. So it will be a top priority for companies. So in order to take up the challenge, it won't be easy, because in France, we have 30% of employees who follow a training program. You have all kinds of training programs. You have training programs with certificates. In the US, it is 50%. In Norway, it is 60%. So I can tell you that we are a little bit far from the countries which train people quite a lot. In France, we have yet to get this training culture. And of course, we need to shore up training culture. And those who we need training are those who get the least training. So people who graduate have less, have more training than the others. And the same goes for senior citizens. With the educational system, people leave school, but they don't have a degree, they don't have a diploma. So when you fail at school, it's very difficult, to get some training again. But I can tell you that companies have a role to play. And companies do provide some training out of a budget of 35 billion. I can't remember exactly the training budget. And companies account for 30 or 40% of the training budget, but there are some stumbling blocks in the companies, in the businesses, especially in small and medium-sized companies. There's a lack of time, a lack of resources in the small companies. There's a lack of capacities, to assess the benefits of training. What will training bring on productivity? It's not easy, to assess the quality of training, and managers are not really eager to train their employees, and there's another fear. You train people, but they will leave a company, and other companies will benefit from that. So on the side of companies, on the side of trade unions and governments, lots of things have to be done. Of course, public action is key in terms of training first, because we have positive externalities. When I'm better trained, it means that I'm more productive, I will be familiar with new technologies, and all people working with me will benefit from that. A person who is better trained will increase his or her own productivity and the productivity of other people. This is what we call positive externalities. So there's a lack of investment in training, and the government has a role to play in terms of training. Training is a pivotal, and you need to consider the role of public authorities. Some obstacles, they should be overcome, especially for small companies. Some small companies that don't have the resources in order to invest in training. The French government has launched some reforms, the individual training account, a total review of the founding account. What are the effects of these measures on a training culture, and what were the problems and issues? The companies and trade unions have a key role to play in terms of innovation. It's a matter of identifying these stumbling blocks. Today, why is it so difficult to train people? What can professional divisions do in order to dispel the obstacles? And trade unions have a role to play to help people who need to be trained. We need to identify those people, and we need to support these transformations. I haven't answered the questions, but I've laid the groundwork. Mark Ferracci, you are one of the brain children of the latest training reforms. You worked with Muriel Pénicaud, the former Minister of Work. We've heard about France Compétences, but what is France Compétences? What about this body? What is the objective of this body? So where do we stand? We created new tools. We need to understand the ultimate aim. So it was said already, training begs two questions. Do we need to train people more? Is it possible to train people better, with some training programs having an impact on productivity, on the stability of jobs, on income, on wages? These are two pivotal questions, because this begs the question of funding. Who should pay for training? So how do we make sure that companies invest more in training, and especially training for those who are low-skilled people? So faced with this question, there's an answer very simple. Those who pay for training will have to make the most of training. So when you have an employee who is trained in a company on a specific software, on a specific corporate software, a software that will be useful to this company, it means that the person won't go to another company in order to bargain with his asset. In this case, training will be funded by the company, and in other instances, the state has to step in terms of training. I will provide you with an example. Some assessment has been made. When you are trained as an employee in a company, and when you lose your job, you will be you will be unemployed, but for a shorter period, in fact. I'm just highlighting what Stéphane said, positive externalities. Employers local authorities, employees can produce a yield. With this reform, we want to create a framework in order to invest in training. You have a shared yield by the stakeholders, and all these stakeholders, I mean, should be able to fund. You have a personal training account. What it's all about, maybe you have the app. It's a tool. And with this tool, your employer will invest money on your account, and Pôle emploi, an employment agency, will put some money. So it's a co-funding mechanism. So I will insist on that. So if you consider the rationale for this reform, it should be possible to co-invest. So tools are necessary, and all the stakeholders and companies, businesses, should be given some incentives in order to launch training programs and schemes. Allow me to underscore two avenues. Companies should feel safe about their investments. You train an employee, you will pay for a training program, 10,000 euros, a training on English, a training on cross-cutting skills or competencies. If after 6 months the employee leaves the company for another company, you will have lost out in terms of investments, and the state has a role to play. The state should be a regulator, and the social partners came up with a proposal, what we call a training process. So you will have to redeem part of the training if you leave the company that has trained you. So I think that this could be an incentive. There's a second avenue. If we have to co-design training in a company, there should be a dialogue between management and employees, not only informal dialogue. I think that there should be some negotiations, bargaining. Today we don't negotiate on training in companies, so we don't negotiate the skills development plan, but in the future we'll have to use that avenue in order to boost the different stakeholders. So there's a corporate representative, Christian Schmidt de la Brélie. You are the CEO of Clesia. So what about these reforms? Have they changed the situation? What is your take on that? I'm the member of the supervisory board, and we've noticed that apprenticeship is key. This recent reform was an asset for a company, so we've increased threefold the number of apprentices in a period of 2 years. It was a significant jump. It was quite positive, but we want more. We want always more. So companies gave us some feedback, and 200 companies were involved. And what is important is to reconcile the academic world and the corporate world. So when young people are aged 15, for example, the main teacher should visit companies in order to get an insight into the companies before giving some guidance to these young people. And it's important to work on collaborative work on maths, languages, because when young people move into the company, they are deprived of these skills. Okay, this is for young people, but for people who are aged 45 and they want to climb up the career ladder in the company, they want to move to another industry. Can you tell me if this reform has changed things? There are some positive elements, of course, but at the end of the day, regarding training, in terms of negotiation, you have to consider the professional branch. So you have the wages, the compulsory bargaining process, health, and training. And if you consider some specific jobs, not IT jobs, or actuaries, or, for example, I'm in charge of the catering branch, and there should be some training every 3 years in order to refresh the skills. And what is important is to anticipate, because we know that lots of people have resigned. And of course, it's important to train senior citizens. Young people were trained, but old workers were not trained properly, and they feel powerless. For example, there's a shortage of 10,000 of coach drivers in order to take our young people to schools. It will be an issue in September. There's a lack of training for our senior citizens, and Ecclesia has cooperated with L'Oreal, so we have a manifesto for people who are 50 years of age. As of 45 years of age, the training program for senior citizens should be revamped so that they can stay longer in the company. Thanks a lot. So Mark Ferracci, you talked about social dialogue, but regarding the trade unions, you are the General Secretary of FSU, an education trade union, but with a broad remit in the public field. Training is important, but is it difficult to get trained when you are a civil servant? So you're right. But we have some expertise because we are working with vocational schools, and we are training young people as part of initial or continuing training programs. And we have an ambition with continuous training, with continuing training, and continuing training should be embedded in a public service of training all lifelong. So people should be able to be trained. And as a trade unionist, and if you consider the last laws on continuous training and apprenticeship, we focused too much on the corporate needs and requirements. That's a prerequisite in terms of continuing education. We need to pay heed to the corporate needs and requirements, but we need to go further than that. Of course, in addition to what has been created, there should be a public service of continuing education. We had the Greta, the so-called Greta schemes. Of course, it's important to beef up skills and competencies, and then it will depend on training. For example, people will have to be familiar with a new software in the company, but this is a local need, a local corporate need. New skills should be developed, and there are some needs for that, and these training needs should be incurred by the authorities, but companies cannot establish all the needs and requirements in terms of training. There are some long-term needs that are not properly taken into account. It's a matter of general interest, and I think that continuing training, continuing education is tailored to the short-term immediate needs in the company. And for us, it would be necessary to establish more ambitious training programs in order to get skills and competencies that could be transferred to other companies. You have new rights, what we call the professional social security. As part of this new structure, the right to training is pivotal. Of course, we need to go further than training, bespoke training in companies. There are huge inequalities in terms of access to training. So a company will train people will train the skilled people in order to get more added value. But you have blue collars and workers, and they can't get access to training. They don't get access to training, and we have to develop continuing education. Mark Ferracci would like to take the floor. Go ahead.
Beaucoup de ce qui a été.
So I agree with a lot of that was said. Just to say that on this issue of training adapted, suited to the needs of the enterprise, the tools we mentioned enable to be trained on all, let's say, academic training, general training. The idea is to find means beyond the cost of training so that people have an income during the training program. But the field, it's open. You're right. I was talking about the law, selecting your professional future, which is another law, France Compétences and other laws. But we see in terms of visibility between all the legislations, there's still progress. Florence Lutzmann, you're the president of the French Federation of Insurance Companies. We're talking earlier about the need to be properly positioned at the level of a branch of a professional sector. That's what you try to do in your sector. Yes, absolutely. Not only in our own insurance domain, but also in the scope of the work we carried out to try to shed light on the societal debates within the scope of the presidential campaign. So we paid attention to those topics that are of a concern to the French people, health, dependency, and also what we call the qualified employment. So qualified employment, why? Because insurers and bankers, but also all the digital trades, engineering, we're all members of the MEDEF, the employer syndicate. So we worked on this notion of qualified employment. And what we wanted is to set an alarm for the public authorities. The two challenges we have to face every day, but are the challenges of tomorrow. Also, the first challenge is the inadequacy, growing inadequacy between the talents produced by the educational system, the university system, the academic system, and our needs in corporations as they exist today. The needs today, including in insurance, it's more digitalization, more science. We model all the risks that we cover. We're on the ecological transition, we work on the coverage of enterprises, but what we observe is that we find more and more difficult to have access to profiles that come from the initial training and that have a scientific education, mathematical education. I'm not talking about people or necessarily engineers, even if we are a lot of engineers, but the fact that a lot of youth, and especially women, have abandoned, after the Blanquer reform, they abandoned mathematics in the high school level. It's a disaster because there are people who will find it more and more difficult to integrate properly in enterprise. And the second challenge is that of making competencies evolve, competencies of our collaborators throughout their career, the professional life. We have trades that are evolving. We talk about disruptions, but with us in our company, it's significant evolutions with the advent of the digital. We have more time to dedicate to the collaborators with relationship type exchanges. So we need people who are more competent on basic competencies, scientific competencies, but who also have a better relationship competence. And we see that today it's the pluri-channel. We want immediate responses, answers. You have an accident with your car, you take a snapshot, and you want to be covered. You want to be reimbursed practically instantaneously because there's artificial intelligence that will analyze the photo that you sent. But at the same time, you want to have access to a human being who will understand your problem if the digital can't answer. And so we're at the same time faced with the need of competencies, digital, scientific, technical, and also skills in the knowing how to be, how to behave. And what the employees are expecting, I was listening to my neighbor, and that's what the CRET is saying. It's a good thing because the employees are want the enriching of their tasks, of their missions towards more human relations, and they are expecting more training for themselves. So within this scope, I think there are opportunities to reconcile both, but the sine qua non condition is that there will be more young people who follow a scientific training, and young women. And I am very happy to see the Rixin law, but if we want to more in the executive committees, in the boards of the insurance companies, if we want to have more parity, more women, then we need more women who have access to these management positions, which presupposes that you're not that you're good in math, but you're. It starts with the initial training, high school. But that would be the object of another debate. But we're under the impression that enterprises are trying to compensate. I turn to you, Cyril Zimana. Is that what you see? Maybe you could say what you do exactly. What is a platform? So I am an entrepreneur, so I'm not an intellectual. I work with my intuition. For 25 years, I developed companies in the digital domain, and that as many as 500 people. And it was always hard for me to hire, recruit a computer specialist, whether in small, medium-sized, large enterprises. They're all faced with the same problem. And besides that, I've been living in Marseille for 13 years. And the wealth of Marseille is its youth. It's the second youngest city in France, but it's also an explosive city. It's a youth that is not trained with a very high unemployment rate. So knowing the needs of enterprises to train the people in the digital domain, and seeing the potential of Marseille and its metropolis in terms of a reservoir of human competencies that can be potentially qualified, we agreed with an association which is called non-profit. I didn't hear the name. Which brings together for the 50 largest enterprises of Marseille. We created a computer school that responds to the needs of enterprises from here or elsewhere. And we have exploited the reform Max Serachi set in place in 2018, and we figured, okay, the Marseille youth is in majority poor, and their parents did not have the cultural reflex to pay for the studies of their children in private schools, for example. And in the computer domain, the offer was really brought by private schools where it costs 7,000 to 8,000 euros a year. So we try to train people to computer sciences, but with a tool that's too expensive for the audience we're targeting. So we don't succeed. So we tried the reform from 2018, which changed things altogether. We designed a school, created a school which trains in 1 to 5 years based on apprenticeship in enterprises, all the publics. It's free, and since you're working as an apprentice in schools, in industry, so in 3 years we trained today 600 students to cyber-safe security, data, web development, software development, coding, proof that there is a demand and that we can grow the number of people who are competent to work in computer departments of insurance companies, agro-food businesses, enterprises. So in fact, we created a training tool that's now suited for a certain audience, and we have as many people who come for initial training who learn a trade. And they don't learn a general competency, they learn a trade, and we train those people as well as university students who, after a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, come to us for training. The age average is over 25. We have about 50% of our students who are in initial training, who are 18 to 20, But there are some people who've worked 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, who come to us to train. And to react on what was said earlier, is we had no problems to recruit our students. Those who graduated, 70% found a job, and the 30% left are continuing their studies, but we have 80% guys, boys. But they're not good in maths. No, computer sciences and mathematics are not the same. Why do we have 80% men, boys? It's because, in line with what was said, is that today the computer trades, if I take my example, are not proposed in high school or college, or high schools. And what I say for my sector, today if you're in college or high school, you're oriented on what the parents tell you, what the counselors tell you, but you have no idea on what you want to do in the future. If you want to convince young women that they can become computer specialists, the computer specialists can work in all activity sectors. So, and it's from primary school that you can show that these are trades that open to all, and especially women. Stephen Cartier, you want to react on this topic? Yes, I wanted to react on this model because I visited this something very comparable 4 or 5 years ago in the U.S. in Chicago, which is called Year Up. It's a program exactly based on the same model. It's a group of enterprises that had clearly identified needs, and a training center for youth where they will train for a year to the needs of an enterprise. They know the needs of these companies. This training center knows. So Year Up today is in 30 cities. At the beginning it was only Chicago, but now it's 30 to 40,000 young people who go to Year Up schools. At one point, Year Up gets money from the federal state and subsidies, and the federal state requires a certain number of criteria be met for this for the signing up. So they're looking for lower qualified people that come from poorer families who are accepted, and so maybe set criteria on parity. That could be an idea. Mckenna, what do you think? No. Reactions and maybe an anecdote I'd like to share with you. 2 reactions to what was said. There are 2 challenges, 2 stakes. That of reconversion. Should the company finance the reconversion of their employees? Well, not really, because the employees control their professional life. Today, if we speak frankly, and go back on what was done in terms of reforms in the recent years today, we know pretty well how to finance the reconversion training programs, but training only. We can finance by adding money to the fund, the CPF, training in digital ways, social activities, digital revolution. We easily find ways to finance that, but we are not really good how to provide a revenue during training. And this is what we have to improve on. But it's in the President's program, and this program should be implemented. We have one tool that should help us, which is called the savings account for universal time, and will apply to all employees, aimed at being portable. You can save days, for example, with your holidays. For example, these days can be used for training activities when you reach 45, or you need to reconvert because you had the physically difficult jobs. That's one thing. And I heard what was said on the link between initial education and enterprises. It's the stake of the orientation. I think we owe the students and the families a very transparent information on what the insertion rate are associated to each diploma and each school. This information is available for some, but in reality a lot of people ignore it. So what we will do, because it's part of the program, within a year or two on Parcoursup. The people who formulate their wishes, maybe some young people have used Parcoursup, will have the information on the professional insertion rate linked with the training they want to follow. If you want to do a master's degree, for example, in political science in such and such a university, you will have the insertion rate at 6, 12, 18 months. It's a piece of information that sheds a light on your choice. And it's important. The anecdote is on the topic of relationship competencies. I'm elected from the French who live in Switzerland. There are some. I spent a lot of time in Switzerland, and I'm an elected representative for these people. In Switzerland, you have a hotel school, which is called the Lausanne Hotel School, which trains people to the hotel trades. They're probably the most prestigious in the world. I was told that the banks, insurance companies, recruit the people trained at the Hotelier School of Lausanne. Learn nothing in the field of finance. Why? Well, because it's a training that is conceived as bringing to the students relationship competencies associated to hotel restaurant businesses, which are very useful in the activities of banks or insurance companies. Just to say that the relationship competencies, yes, I confirm, very important. Christian Sheep, do you think it's a good system, this idea of a personal training account, a time account that the employees can use so that they have an income during their training? This could facilitate access to training. I think that you also need to promote the enterprise that does more than the average. If we talk about enterprises that are at 25%, Ecclesia we're more at 70%. But generally, we should highlight those companies that do their job. I'm talking like a mission-driven enterprise. We do the job, and the more we can positivize on this approach, the more we will encourage the company to train its collaborators. And then within the enterprise, it's very difficult to have the certificate diploma recognized, to have a company being validated by the state. It's practically impossible. We try, but it's very difficult to obtain. And obviously, the avenue that was opened by this reform opens the way to new possibilities, to new potential. I'm very happy to hear you about this. Is to publish the rate of performance indicators linked to the training in the vocational training, including academic training. Steven Zimmerman, the training that you proposed, to which your younger or a little older audiences, they are certified? Do you get a diploma? Is it hard to get professional validation? No, they all yield a certificate, give a certificate. Either we've proposed our own programs through the Ministry of Labor. I wouldn't say it's easy because there's a bottleneck and the processing lead time is long, but generally it works. We managed to, starting from scratch, we existed for 3 years. We used programs that already existed and then proposed our own programs when we thought it was there was an important need. And the professional diploma, enables to certify the level reached by the student. We have trainings programs that go from 1 year to 5 years. It's very important that the certificates show that you've had O levels plus something, plus 1, plus 2, plus 5, and that's how you validate your competencies. And the fact of having a certificate, let's say, they call it a title, the fact of having it has the same value as a diploma. And it's hyper motivating for the younger or a little older to undergo this training. It's something that will have a universal value in all markets, in all countries. I don't know if it will work, but we try to have diplomas or quote-unquote diplomas that are recognized locally. What are the hindrances or the barriers where it would be fairly easy to intervene? We saw the question of the validity of the titles, to find the income to get a revenue during the training period, to encourage employees to take this time. On the corporate side, it's on the management side that there are hindrances, and we're good students because 90% of our collaborators have access to training. We've adapted to telework, and there's no big drop, during the COVID years. And I would say that the barrier for me is the initial training level. If the people don't have any mathematical competencies, it'll be very difficult in their professional life to compensate this gap, which is an initial gap. And I think it's a point that's very important. There are also all sorts of systems that favor the transition, reconversion. We study them closely with the FDF and the SynTech, and a lot are reserved for people who don't have a high school diploma. So we're not talking about transitional possibilities. All the systems that we don't see why it would be closed for people who have diplomas, that minimum revenue. And lastly, that there are discussions on apprenticeship, and I would like to defend this system. Apprenticeship, I've seen years when we saw the Germans and we're wondering why did they succeed. And now we know it's apprenticeship. It started now in France, and it works, and it works very well because the higher education system does it. And so we know what the costs are, but let's keep this mode to attract the young workers with diplomas. So the apprenticeship is a wonderful way to learn progressively because you spend time in the enterprise, know how to behave. And apprenticeship contracts 7 times out of 10 turn into a permanent job. So it's true that apprenticeship, 750,000 young people, we haven't seen this for 10 or 20 years, but there are some debates on the cost of this apprenticeship and the fact that apprenticeship is reserved to young people who are more often qualified, but there's it trickles. Well, apprenticeship are doing well, they're making progress at all levels of qualification, but always bear in mind that apprenticeship has more impact on the professional career of the youth when it's done before the O levels than in university. When you have a high school diploma plus 1 or 2 years of university, of course it gives you an added value. So let's not question that, but your diploma, previous diploma, protects you against unemployment. That is the high school diploma. So in reality, the impact in terms of added value when you assess this with a rigorous way, apprenticeship is very much stronger on low level of qualifications. And since we're in a world where there's no magic money, especially a world where France compétence is in a deficit, we should wonder if we should not differentiate according to the level of diploma. So I agree with the conclusion to differentiate according to the level of diploma. I think makes sense in terms of management, but I have doubts when you lessen the importance it has for people who have a diploma. Not everybody has a master. A lot of young people go to university and they stop after the third year and they don't have a degree, a master's degree, because the selectivity rate is very high after the third year. And I think that a level of high school diploma +3 without apprenticeship, there's no guarantee for employment. I don't fully agree to say that, in fact, the diploma is a guarantee that enables to say that we can lessen the importance, but the level of taking charge is lesser, but for the first 3 years I'm not sure. So if you want to refine the system, Benoit, you wanted to react. Well, on that, apprenticeship is a good avenue for training that can be developed. It's interesting, but to go back on what was said, I say that it's not the same. But the apprenticeship after high school or before high school, I don't have the exact figures, but I think the rate of rupture of contracts, the breakage of contracts is about 30%, and where you have professional high school, you have about 11% of dropping out. There's a lot more, too much. But if you do a parallel between both, the pre-high school diploma apprenticeship has less results when it comes to give qualifications that will be perennial, because we sign apprenticeship contracts, but if they're broken before their term, well, maybe because the young person in question is not ready, not suited for this apprenticeship situation. It's different from school, you know. So I wouldn't recommend making it the avenue to adopt that, but it's a good opportunity for training. But just wanted to say something about on the initial training issue. There's a lot to improve. I fully agree with what was said on scientific teaching, a certain number of topics that have to be developed in school, including collective competencies, collective working. That is not very developed in France. And obviously it's seen afterwards in the qualification of youth. I think it's important. Also, we should give some thought as to the new forms of training. Computer sciences is part of that. Today we don't have access to computer sciences, and it's either very good students because they're good in math that will orient in computer sciences, or in professional high schools you have computer maintenance, but that has nothing to do with it. But there's no training on trades. And after, last thing, we're talking about the main teachers. If in the educational system we had additional means with qualified personnel trained to that effect to present in a very legible way the training avenues and the corporate world, enterprise world, this could help the system. We notably have orientation counselors, very little, very few. And this is why the job is up to the main teacher. And so we have to revisit things. I'm in line with the need to have a more legible system. But there's not only the indicator rate or the insertion rate or the sector that we choose. We have to know if this will please us. So there's a psychological approach that's needed. Individual work with each young person. And we have to have a legible training, and I think this present system does not contribute. Parcoursup is complicated with choices of specialties, with precondition, the possibility to continue studies, not very legible, not very intelligible. Access to training also, there's some private organizations, public organizations. So the last word, diplomas that are difficult, that are not recognized, I feel like saying, well, okay, we're lucky that it's a bit difficult and that we don't just recognize a diploma that is easily obtained. We check, we assess the qualifications, see that they're complete things. Otherwise, we develop a system that's absolutely not transparent, where anybody can open up a training center. So no certifications to everything or anything. I see the time is running. Do you have any questions from the floor? Okay, maybe we can hand the microphone. Please introduce yourselves first. Introduce yourselves, please. Thank you, hello everybody. Lisa Brandazur. I'm very interested in this because I come back from a professional reconversion. I did scientific studies. I was 15 years an engineer in complex system engineering, and I felt like reconverting. And today I'm a trainer in sustainable development and a professional in tourism. And these careers, well, are not addressed in school. And today I think there's a hole in the racket in how we train the youth to tomorrow's world and how we reinvent tomorrow's world, creative careers such as this one. I don't do only training in sustainable development, I also do creative coaching for artists. You'll say, what is the relationship between all that? Well, it's simple. Is when you start working on yourself, you can contribute positively on society. So all the tools I use in the creative coaching are found in the work and mission-driven enterprises, how we involve our company in positive actions, and we can bridge. That's how you span the bridges. Well, the idea is how France Competency or France Compétence and all the official instances take into account this need to train the youth in such a way that they are open-minded and reinvent the world of tomorrow without being on rails or in specific careers and locked in. Louis? Yes. We see an interest of the work of Osopro. I was talking about sectors that I protect. I have 3 chair people that are members of the board, whether you're in the pharmaceutical industry, in the hotel restaurant business, in transport, development, the example of sustainable development. I have one president who just got his first Green Star. These are trades that you learn thanks to the professional branches. We don't know 50% of the jobs that will exist by 2030. We see it's the work of these professional branches to be able to find rapidly tomorrow's trades and to adapt on a permanent basis. In the pharmaceutical industry, when you had the revolution of medical visitors that practically disappeared from overnight, and the new standards that were put in place, that were enforced in transport, traverse transport, they involve reconversions of drivers, for example, that didn't exist. So we see the power of the field. Maybe one more question, sir. Samir Ayoub, I'm the director of Higher Education Institute, so thank you very much for all your testimonials and your relevant remarks on the need to have a lot of maths in the higher education level. We were very deceived that this education was an option in the high schools. The question is back on the table, and I really hope that we'll be able to place back maths in as a compulsory program in the high school, and for girls also. And I think this accentuates the inequalities in the higher education level. My question would be on apprenticeship. I defend, of course, apprenticeships in the higher education level, what it brings. But today I think we shouldn't kid ourselves, because the deficit, and this was said, the deficit of France Compétence takes us in 2023 to to close the tap at the higher education level. But today, enterprises, are they ready, or professional branches, to take charge of the rest? That is to take the relay, take apprenticeships without benefiting from the a bonus from the state. Are the companies ready to make that effort? I will not respond for the companies and professional branches, but I have a conviction. Well, thank you for your question. It's really relevant. It goes back to what I said earlier on the necessity to find co-financing. The state cannot always reinvest in France Compétences, 6 billion now, but not in one shot. But my conviction is simple. I think we have to have a dialogue with the social partners at the branch level. I think the conventional obligations for each branch who have a role to play, they can have the vocation of completing the financing. So I'd like to conclude. I think it's sound, because what Stefan mentioned, externalities. When you train apprenticeship, it benefits to all the enterprises of the branch who resolve their problems of recruiting tensions or stress. So it's logical and sound that we do this. So what do you think? I would say, insofar as financing, there's no communicating ways before the high school diploma and after the high school. So it's not the right way of addressing this. So we will continue to fight that this training be recognized, including in the higher education level. But the question of financing, it's finance, recognizing finance. I think we've covered all ground. So thank you very much. Thank you for your attention, participation. You can find this session on the website of the Cercle des Économistes. I think tomorrow these topics will also be discussed. So please check it out on the program. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.